dye and pigment fusion. Totally new to, I think, the ink world. And what I love about that is Distress has really evolved throughout its 13-year career, really. We had started with 6 simple dye inks, and it's expanded into paints and stains and markers and crayons and glitters and embossing powders and all of those great things. But to have another new ink to the mix, that is what's great. Now, oxides are referred to as dye and pigment fusion. It's like, what does that mean? Well, it's because it has both properties of an ink pad. We've got the opacity of a pigment ink, the translucency of a dye, and when you combine the two, we create magic. So here's a couple of things to point out when it comes to these two properties. Well, first of all, because it has a pigment value, that means we can use it on a variety of surfaces, light and dark, okay? Because we're going to get that opacity of a pigment. But we can also get this cool blendability of a dye. If you've ever worked with pigment inks, they usually muddy up if you try to put too many colors, but because this has dye properties, we create some incredible backgrounds. Now, Distress Oxides, they're in the traditional size case. It is a silver plastic, so it's easily identifiable from the black ink pads. The surface itself is a felt pad. Usually when we think of a pigment ink, it's that squishy foam, glycerin, kind of sticky and gooey, and this is not. So this is the same firm surface that we always see in our Distress inks, okay? Now, this is a very wet ink, which is nice, but it's not too wet, which means it doesn't have to be heat set, it will air dry, but it does give me the ability to stamp, stencil, blend, and even emboss. So I can stamp with these oxides and use my embossing powder and emboss with them. Now, when we're using these on surfaces, not only can we blend, but we can stamp. That's what's really cool about this. So if I stamp with this just on a surface like craft, you can see that it stamps with incredible detail. It's a pigment, right? We can stamp it and it's going to dry and we get great detail. But Distress Oxides react with water. So if we spray this with water, the image will oxidize. And we actually start to separate the two layers and we get this really luminous effect just by combining this with water. That's where the whole game changing happens. This is a Distress ink background. We're used to seeing this. We have these dyes and it creates beautiful backgrounds because Distress reacts with water, but a translucent dye, you have to be careful with how many layers, because too many layers of a translucent dye turn to mud. However, with an oxide, because it is a dye and a pigment, we have the ability to layer and layer and layer, and we can end up with any colors we want sitting on the top, but it also has this wonderful, creamy, kind of smooth texture, and it's almost like we want philo vision, right? But the cool thing about this is that you would think that this chalk would rub off, and it doesn't, because again, it's not a chalk ink, it is an oxide. So here's how it works. We're going to go through and do some backgrounds. I'm going to work on the craft sheet. I'm just going to take the oxides and I'm going to press down and kind of move. Keep that in mind whenever you're applying ink to a surface. You need to press down. It's a suspended medium, right? So you need to press to get ink out of there. That's why it's not important to store your ink pads any specific way. People think I need to store them upside down, sideways. It doesn't matter. Ink is suspended. So the only way to get ink out of the pad is to press down, similar we would on a stamp. Now you can probably tell right away that if you were working with traditional dye inks, you probably shouldn't have this many colors on your craft sheet at one time, but with oxide, we can. So what we're going to do is spray this with water. And I want to spray this until I have droplets of color. That's really important. We're going to take a surface now. This is mixed media heavy stock, and mixed media heavy stock is different than a manila tag. I know I have one. Here we go. That's a manila tag. You can see right away the difference in color, but also how it holds up to water. Usually when we work with a manila tag on a surface, as soon as it gets wet, a manila tag starts to curl, and the heavy stock likes to stay flat when we're working with it. It's important whenever we're working with inks of any kind, whether they're dye or whether they're oxide, wet on wet blends color, wet on dry layers color. So this first layer, you just need to get what you get and be happy with it. Don't keep going back into that to try to fill in the blanks on your first layer, or you will muddy your colors. Dry it with a heat tool for just a little bit, then we can go back in, start building that oxide background. Now the more layers and the more water you start to add, the more it's going to start to oxidize. And this is what I love about it. The Distress Oxides react whether they're wet right now or even after I dry it with a heat tool. I can go back and add water and it will react just like Distress inks. But our layerability, wow, ridiculous. And you see as it's starting to dry, it starts to kind of get that hazy kind of oxidized look. Now, if it looks like sludge, it dries like sludge. So if you don't like something, take that off because it will always dry like that. So now we're gonna go back in. I'm gonna flip this around. I'm gonna put some bright colors on the dark side, dark colors on the bright side. And we're really gonna start to layer this around. Really cool. All right, I'm gonna add a little bit of water around here. And then I look at my background and say, what is it missing? Oh, it's missing pink and yellow. Let's throw that in too. Why not? Because we can with an oxide. So here we'll take a little bit of worn lipstick. Let's throw that over there. And let's even take some fossilized amber. All these colors on the craft sheet. So cool. Because with an oxide, I can decide at any time where I want to put a color, and that color is going to sit right onto the surface. So I can take that pink and yellow and you can see how it's going to sit right over the top of that blue. And as it dries, you'll see that worn lipstick just kind of oxidize in a very light pink. That fossilized amber start to oxidize. Again, we can just drip a little water over the top of it. Yeah, see how excited they are for oxide? You can't even imagine. They're just cheering. They walk around and cheer all day long for these because they are so excited. I don't blame them. I'm excited too. I think they're cool. All right, just gonna go in a couple more times, and now I'm being just a little bit more particular as far as where I want to put color. You know, do I want to put a little bit of purple there, a little bit of red there? Look at that. Now we're good. Now we are good. And let's be realistic. If this was dye, we would have been done long ago. We would have put so many layers of all these colors of regular distress dye ink, everything would have looked muddy. Instead, you can look through this and see the red and the orange and the yellows and the blues and greens. See, they cannot get enough of these. All right, let me clean this up. And we have our oxide background. Look at that. That is so cool. Awesome. And you can stamp on this. Everything that we normally do with our distress inks, we can stamp on this. Really cool. So those are oxides. Now I'm going to share how we can create oxides with dye. That's pretty neat. I just like to show people that because sometimes when you work with this, you think, oh, reminder there, just because we have a new toy doesn't mean you have to forget what's in the toy box, right? That's important. Everything that we're working with is really key to understanding that when we are using a new medium, play around with what you already have and see how that works. So here we've got ink and oxide. And now we'll go in, again we're going to add some of that, go around a little bit, and let's just start layering. Now when we first put this on, you'll see that obviously picked raspberry is pretty dominant. You know, again, that's our dye. That dye is going to be far more vibrant. But we're still starting to get that oxidized layer of those distress oxides. But we'll be able to build this up. Okay, I'm going to dry that. Let's go back in. Let's add a little bit there. Completely different, and you see that even though we're layering the oxide, what is that color coming through? It's that pink. So it is. It's nice to know that when you're creating a background, if you have an idea in mind that says, oh, you know what, I want to make sure that my background is more pink or more green or more blue, well then use that maybe in your distress ink and then add other colors of oxide to it. Throwing a little bit of purple over there. Let's put a little bit of blue over there. So I love that I can put blue over orange and still have blue, and we'll add a little bit of pink. But everywhere peeking through, you're seeing picked raspberry because that's the dye. Really neat. And much brighter. I mean, I'll compare the two, but you're going to see that finish tag much brighter because we have that dye, and that dye is super impactful on any layer that you put over the top of it. So you really have some endless possibilities. I would totally take another piece of paper in there. It's all right. Yeah. You really have endless possibilities if you're just using oxide or oxide with dye. But it still has that great oxide finish because, again, we've incorporated our distress oxide. Awesome.
Microplace.